In this presentation, I will explain consensus mechanisms that are used by the blockchain. Here you see the table of contents of this presentation. In the first slide, I will explain what consensus mechanisms are. In the second, third, and fourth slide, I will explain three popular consensus mechanisms. And in the last three slides, I will compare these consensus mechanisms with each other. A consensus mechanism is an algorithm that decides which validator can add a block to the blockchain. As we've seen before, a blockchain consists of a sequence of blocks and the validators agree on the latest block. A blockchain grows because a validator proposes a new block. He sends it to the other validators and they accept it. And this process is repeated. The algorithm that decides which validator can add a new block to the blockchain is called the consensus mechanism of the blockchain. Three popular consensus mechanisms are proof of work, proof of stake, and proof of authority. They're abbreviated as POW, PoS, and PoA. Proof of work is simply said a game of chance. In proof of stake, a validator has to freeze some money. If he behaves badly, he loses money, and if he behaves well, he gets rewards. And in proof of authority, a validator has to prove his identity. So if he behaves badly, people know who they have to hold responsible. In proof of work, validators compete to solve a statistical problem. This consists of finding a number, which is called a nonce, that is added to the block so that the hash of the block has certain properties. Typically, the hash of the block has to start with sufficient zeros. If a validator finds a nonce so that the hash of the block is valid, he can send a nonce and a block to the other validators. The other validators can calculate the hash of the block with the nonce, verify that the hash starts with sufficient zeros, and then they accept the block and they add it to the network. With proof of work, if more people want to add a block, the requirements for a valid hash become more stringent. So if more people compete to add a block, it becomes harder to find a nonce that generates a valid hash, and therefore more calculations have to be made. And if there is a lot of competition, proof of work becomes an algorithm that is very energy consuming. This has as a consequence that to control the network, you need to buy a lot of compute power. To control the network in proof of work, to control the decision power, you need to have more than a majority of the compute power, and if there is a lot of competition, a lot of compute power is needed to control the network. And it becomes very hard. In proof of stake, a validator has to freeze some money, which is called staking. Once you've done this and you've become a validator, you're selected at random to add a block to the blockchain. The bigger your stake, the higher your chance to be selected to add a block to the blockchain. But this chance is linear to the size of your stake. So if your stake is 10 times as big, you have 10 times as much chance to be selected to add a block to the blockchain. Proof of stake is seen as a better algorithm than proof of work for the following four reasons. It is considered to be more secure. To have a majority of decision power in a proof of work blockchain, you need to buy half of the compute power. To have a majority of the decision power in a proof of stake blockchain, you need to buy majority of the cryptocurrencies that are staked. And typically it is more expensive to buy enough cryptocurrency than to buy enough compute power. A proof-of-stake blockchain can be made more scalable than a proof-of-work blockchain. This is because with the proof-of-stake consensus mechanism, the validators are known beforehand. The validators are known beforehand because to become a validator, you have to first stake your money. Because the validators are known beforehand, the validators can be split up in different groups, and the blockchain can also be split up in different blockchains, and each group of validators can get a blockchain, and all these blockchains can be processed in parallel. This splitting up of the blockchain in multiple blockchains that are processed in parallel is called sharding. This is not possible with proof of work. Proof of stake also tends to be more decentralized than a proof of work blockchain, because with proof of work, the people with a lot of compute power are at an advantage compared to people with less compute power. They have less relative costs, and therefore the share of people with a lot of compute power tends to grow in a proof of work blockchain, and therefore there is a trend towards more centralization in a proof of work blockchain. In proof of stake, these economies of scale do not exist. If you have a bigger stake, you are not at a relative advantage compared to someone with a smaller stake. There are not a lot of computations needed to select which validator adds a block to the blockchain with proof of stake. So this is just like the validator that adds a block is selected at random. This is very energy efficient, as opposed to proof of work, where to add a block to the blockchain, a validator has to check a lot of numbers as nonces and find a valid nonce and make a lot of computations. So a proof of stake consensus mechanism is very efficient. The validator that adds a block is selected at random. There are no computations needed at all. In proof of authority, a validator needs to prove his identity. This occurs through an authority, typically a central authority, that verifies that the validator is who he claims to be. Once your identity has been proven and you've been approved by the central authority, you become a validator, and like in proof of stake, validators are selected at random to add a block to the blockchain. Differences with proof of work and proof of stake are that proof of authority is considered to be a more secure consensus mechanism. This is because in proof of work or in proof of stake, you can be anonymous. In proof of work, you just have to buy enough compute power, and in proof of stake, you just have to buy enough in proof of stake, you have to buy enough cryptocurrency to become a validator. And in proof of authority, you have to prove your identity, and people know who you are, so if you misbehave, they can hold you responsible, while in proof of work or in proof of stake, they cannot hold you responsible. You only lose your compute efforts, or you can only lose the money that you staked. So this is considered more of an incentive for validators to behave well, so therefore people consider that proof of authority is more secure than proof of work or proof of stake. Proof of authority can be made more scalable even than proof of stake. So on the one hand, you also know what the validators are beforehand. So you can do the same thing as with proof of stake and make the blockchain more scalable. But also with proof of authority, the verification is simpler than with proof of stake. So therefore, the blockchain can be made a bit more scalable even. On the other hand, a proof of authority blockchain is less decentralized than a proof of work or a proof of stake blockchain, and this is because everyone needs to be approved through a central authority, and also, well, you cannot verify many people, and typically a proof of authority blockchain consists of a group of parties that know each other, and there is a limit on the amount of people that, or the amount of validators that are verified in a proof of authority blockchain. As with proof of stake, the validators that add a block are selected at random. There are not a lot of computations needed for this, and this is an energy efficient consensus mechanism. To give the validators an incentive to behave well and do what they have to do, they have to get rewards when they behave well, and they have to be punished when they behave badly. With proof of work, the rewards and the punishments are limited. It's basically only when you add a good block that is accepted by the other validators, you get the rewards of the block, so you get the mined cryptocurrencies and you get the transaction fees. But if you just propose a bad block that is not accepted by the other validators, all you do is you lose your effort. So they think this is enough for proof of work, that when you behave well you get rewards, and if you behave badly, okay, you just waste your time. But with proof of work, if you validate a block correctly or incorrectly, or if you don't do anything, there are no rewards for this or no punishments. This is different with proof of stake or proof of authority. So in proof of stake, if you add a good block, you're rewarded. If you add a bad block, you're punished. But also, the rewards are distributed more evenly. So when you validate a block that is approved, so you do a good validation, you also get rewards. On the other hand, with proof of stake, if you accept a block that is rejected by the majority of the other validators, you also get punished. And if you are inactive, so if you do not add a block when you're expected to, or if you do not validate a block when you're expected to, you're also punished. In proof of stake, the punishment is called slashing, and this consists of you losing some money, and you may also be kicked out of the network. In proof of authority, typically the reward is a blockchain. So there are not often, like proof of authority blockchains typically don't give many monetary rewards, as opposed to proof of work or proof of stake blockchains. But in a proof of authority blockchain, you're a validator because you have a shared responsibility. You share a blockchain with the other parties, so everyone knows each other. You want to have a blockchain together, and the reward is actually the blockchain, and that's why you do the validation and you add the blocks. On the other hand, you have an incentive not to do bad things, so not to verify bad blocks or to add bad blocks, or not to be inactive when people expect you to verify or add a block, because if you do something bad, people know who you are, because your identity is known, and you will lose your reputation. And if you really are causing damage to the blockchain, they can come after damages, or they can kick you out of the blockchain, and this is something you will want to avoid. So proof of authority is all based on trust. People know who you are, and therefore they think you will act responsibly. If we compare the blockchains to each other, if we compare the consensus mechanisms of the blockchains to each other, then we can see that they all have a high security. If we define security as if the majority of the validators is trustworthy, how hard is it to add a bad block to the blockchain? Then with a proof of work blockchain, this is difficult because you will need to buy a lot of compute power, so the security is high. With proof of stake, the security is even higher, because with proof of stake you need to buy enough cryptocurrencies, and typically it's more expensive to buy enough cryptocurrencies to control the majority of the decision power of the blockchain, compared to buying enough compute power to control the majority of the decision power on the blockchain. And in proof of authority, the security is the highest because all the validators are known, and if most of them want to be reliable, they will stay reliable. Like, it's hard to make them do bad things because they will be held responsible otherwise. On the other hand, a proof of authority network is not very decentralized, because you have a central authority that has to approve the validators, and also the validators, they have to prove their identity, and people also know who they are. So if there are typically less validators, and if someone wants to manipulate the blockchain, they also know who they have to manipulate, and it's easier to manipulate a proof of authority blockchain. On the other hand, with a proof of work or proof of stake, the validators are anonymous, and there can be a lot of validators, and therefore the decentralization is high. The decentralization is higher with a proof of stake blockchain, because with a proof of work blockchain, people with a lot of compute power have advantages over people with less compute power, and therefore the people with a lot of compute power tend to grow their share in the decision power of the network, while you do not have these economies of scale in a proof of stake blockchain. If we look at the scalability property, a proof of work blockchain is not very scalable, so you have a limited amount of transactions per second. In the proof of stake and proof of authority, the scalability can be made high. So in proof of stake you can do sharding, so you can split the blockchain up in multiple blockchains that can be processed in parallel, because you know the validators beforehand, and you can split the validators up in different groups of validators that each process another blockchain. In proof of authority, you have the same situation as with proof of stake, and also the verification is a bit simpler, so the scalability is also even higher than with proof of stake. If you look at the energy consumption, proof of work, you need a lot of energy consumption to add a new block to the blockchain because people basically compete with each other to find a valid nonce that generates a hash that has the right properties, which is a very compute-intensive process, while the energy consumption for proof of stake and proof of authority is low because the validator that adds a block to the blockchain is selected at random. If we look at the most efficient consensus mechanism, then proof of authority is the most efficient one. But the problem it has is that because of the limited decentralization, it's also a consensus mechanism that can be compromised by big organizations that really want to subvert the blockchain, where this is not possible with a big proof of work or proof of stake blockchain. If we then compare private versus public blockchains, so a private blockchain is a blockchain that is shared between a group of organizations that own each other. So typically this is in logistics, so companies that share a logistics chain with each other, they typically share a private blockchain. They know each other, and for them a proof of authority is ideal for two reasons. It's the most efficient consensus mechanism, and also every validator has to prove his identity, so they are sure that the person who is validating is someone they know and is trustworthy. A proof of authority consensus mechanism is not suited for a public blockchain because it has a limited decentralization, and therefore it can be subverted, it can be more easily manipulated than a blockchain with a proof of work or proof of stake consensus mechanism. If you want to use a public blockchain where everyone can join that, and you want to make sure that it is not controlled, you need to use a consensus mechanism that is either proof of work or proof of stake. As we've said before, proof of stake is seen as the better consensus mechanism, so this would normally be the preferred consensus mechanism. However, technically proof of stake is much more complicated than proof of work. So this is a consideration. If a blockchain is new, it's easier to start with a proof of work consensus mechanism than proof of stake. It requires a lot of technical complexities. When we look at the decentralization, also, a proof of work blockchain is easily decentralized since the beginning, but it becomes harder to maintain. With proof of stake, it's the opposite. It's hard to have decentralization in the beginning, but it's easier to maintain this centralization. Why is that? With proof of work, everyone who wants to can join, so you just need to buy enough compute power and you start supporting the proof of work blockchain. So if you just buy a computer, you can join the blockchain, and therefore it's open to anyone and it's decentralized from the start. But on the other hand, with a proof of work blockchain, people with more compute power are at a cost advantage compared to people with less compute power, and therefore there are economies of scale, and people with more compute power tend to grow their share in the network, and there is a tendency towards more centralization. With proof of stake, the difficulty is that you need to distribute the cryptocurrency that is used for staking to enough different people so that there is not one group of people that controls a majority of the cryptocurrency. If you start a new blockchain and you own all the cryptocurrency, you cannot use a proof of stake consensus mechanism because you decide what happens with the blockchain. You have to make sure that the cryptocurrency is distributed to enough different parties that don't work together, that don't collide, so that you make sure that no one can control a majority of the cryptocurrency. Once you've done that, because in a proof of stake blockchain there are no economies of scale for people who have a bigger stake than compared to people with a lower stake, it's easy to maintain the decentralization.